Mr. Palmer. We are back again for another episode, and I have to just say, Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. This is a special episode.
Indeed it is.
This is our Halloween special. So good to be here.
It's always good to be back. Even if the dog is a little bit haunted today.
Hopefully the haunted dog doesn't freak out my real dog. And
this is why I use headphones. Oh man, it's what, 90 seconds. We got to start doing a bingo card. How long it takes us to get off the rails.
That's true.
And no, before we hit record is not an option because then they win every time. So Halloween episode, it's a special. This is a stray dog. If anybody hasn't been paying attention, this is when Jim and I just get to talk with Jim and I, because why not? So we've got another stray dog. This is our fourth, because we've actually been keeping count.
We have?
Yeah, well, you have. So you've been keeping us looking good.
I don't know. That's what the schedule says. So,
well, who maintains the schedule?
I have no idea. I don't want to take credit for that mess.
Okay. Well, anyways, that's a little bit scary, but that's a good segue for what is our topic today.
Well, seeing it's Halloween and, this is a Wi-Fi podcast, why don't we talk about the scariest Wi-Fi we've ever seen?
I had to go there.
Yes. Stuff that makes you scream, whether it's just internally or actually externally.
I feel like part of this episode came together. I think we were talking several episodes back, and we mentioned bad fi, and then we had the epiphany. Somebody had the epiphany. I'm not going to take credit or blame, but we said, let's talk about worst Wi-Fi, scariest Wi-Fi, and somebody who's not on the podcast, maybe possibly you. Looked at the schedule and said, hey, look, we're going to release on Halloween. And it kind of just clicked. See, if we had a producer, he'd be planning this. So this is just us getting, sheer dumb luck.
Yeah, that's generally how it works, isn't it, though?
If it wasn't for dumb luck, I'd have no luck at all.
Well, so let's put a little preface behind this, though, because not to bring too much personal information into it, but you've been going on a lot of college tours lately.
Oh, God.
Well, not a lot, but I mean,
more than enough.
More than enough. And every time you go on these tours, looking, at what colleges your children are going to be going to, I always get these random messages from you. And it's like, can you believe they did this? And can you believe they did that? So I figured, let's sort of take that whole thing of John being scared going on college tours with the Wi-Fi that he sees, and let's make an episode about it. Let's actually talk about what are some of the scariest things that you've seen. So not counting the college tours, because I don't want to name and shame people on here. I want to keep
that. And I can actually add a high school to that yesterday, because I've got for you want to talk about scary. I've got 3 kids going into college next year. I've got a young son going into high school in a year and change. So yeah, I'm going on tours, but yeah, I saw one yesterday, and I'm not going to get to it now, but we can talk about it later because it's number 5 on your list.
Oh,
and I just cringed. So we have a little bit of a list we can go down. We can throw some random stuff in there. But yeah, let's talk about some of the scariest Wi-Fi ever.
Let's start with the scariest thing that everybody, I think it's one of the most universal hated, scariest things ever: captive portals.
Mm-hmm. I don't have to agree with that. Now, I want to throw out the caveat, not to be the SE on the podcast, but I am the SE on the podcast. Captive portals and other things on here, at the end of the day, there could be a valid reason for them. From a Wi-Fi engineering perspective, we might not like them, but the reality is if the customer's saying, I want this, I need this, here's my reasons why, if they're paying for the deployment and it's their deployment, it's their call, end of story. As Wi-Fi professionals, what we have to do, as much as we can without getting argumentative, is explain why it's a bad idea. With that sort of disclaimer out of the way, why are captive portals bad, Jim? Why are they scary?
So I'll put a little disclaimer behind this again, because I actually wrote a blog post a few years ago on my personal blog about captive portals. And the thing is, we have to understand sometimes that there are legal requirements, or somebody comes down when the lawyers come down and say, you know, the lawyers for an organization comes down and says, we are mandating you have a captive portal. At that point, you know, as much as we don't like it, we have to go that way. We have to do it. And it's not that they're all bad, because some of them have not been too bad that I've been. Now, what drives me nuts and what makes me scared is when you get captive portals that are misconfigured. And that is what is scary about it, because I remember, not to name names, but a long time ago, we had a captive portal that would give you not the blue screen of death on your Windows computer. It would give you what I called the white screen of death, which was you would get through the captive portal experience, and then it would just show you a white screen on your browser. And what that meant was
connected or not, right?
Well, what that meant is that you were connected, but because you weren't going anywhere, because a lot of captive portals will have what's called a post authentication redirection. And yet devices will have a method to figure out if you are on a captive portal, and they'll pop up a browser just to get through the captive portal. But if they don't have a post authentication redirection, you're not going anywhere. So it doesn't redirect you, because you can click it and say, hey, redirect it to wherever it was I was going. Great. Except you weren't going anywhere. So it didn't send you anywhere. So you got a white screen because there was just nothing to display. And so I got, so once I realized that, I started programming that into all of my captive portals. And normally it would just take you to an internal HTML page that would say, congratulations, you're now online, in the worst possible HTML font and format and script you could ever come up with, because I am not a coder. But it was that message of, and so I would institute a post authentication redirection on all my captive portals, and it solved a lot of those problems. And so that's the scary thing with captive portals, is not necessarily that they exist, it's that they're misconfigured and they don't work.
Yeah, no, that goes back to, and you'll hear it a lot, fast, frictionless. Forget about the free part. Because again, at the end of the day, there are definitely people in the community that will say captive portals are bad, and it's a blanket statement. The reality is, like Jim said, lawyers love them or hate them, and I have no opinion there in any case for any lawyers listening. Legal requirements, end user protections, things like that, they need to be there. So, yeah, that's fine, but get them right.
Get them right.
Moving on. This is one I know, and I'm going to plug it. I'm going to plug this because this is the one that I think was my introduction to Jim Palmer before Jim Palmer became Ruckus. Rate limiting. This is a bad idea. Terrible, horrible, scary, bad idea. Why is it bad? Why is it scary?
Funny thing is, this actually just came up the other day on one of the Slacks. I don't forget which Slack it was, but they were talking about TCP retries at layer 4. And that is why rate limiting is a bad idea, because we think of retries as a layer 1 retry on, going over the air, like, hey, I had to resend my frame because I didn't get an ACK type of thing. But there's also a TCP retry at layer 4. And so when you rate limit, and this is even worse when your firewall or whoever's rate limiting doesn't do a traffic shaping, which is they just, if you buffer it and you shape it, that's worse than if you just drop it. So what happens is the server, say like a, popular media streaming service, will send your client 100 packets, and your rate limiting says you get 10. And so the client device then sends a TCP ACK saying, I have 10 packets that I got from you. And the server says, great, let me send you the other 90 you didn't get, except those 90 are being shaped on the firewall and being held. And so now you have a duplicate of 90 packets. And then you let another 10 through. And you go, great, I got 11 through 20. And it says, okay, I'll send you the other 80 again. So now you have, 90, 80, or 80, 80, and 80, where now you have like 240 packets sitting on your firewall, which is congesting your WAN interface. And so you can create a directed denial of service attack against yourself, because your client devices are not sending an ACK back to the server, and it's a layer 4 ACK that we don't look for, letting it know I got all of its packets. And so you can actually do a directed denial of service attack against yourself by rate limiting, and it will crash your WAN link. And then you think, hey, now I got to go buy a bigger WAN link. So then you spend more money when you really don't have to. So there you go.
Yeah. Definitely scary. I think the the short and skinny of that is ultimately, without getting into the WAN links, the idea of Wi-Fi, it's burstable traffic. Get them on, get them off, get them on their way. I reference that because that was Jim's blog post when Jim worked at his former job. You rate limit somebody to 10 meg, it's going to take them a long time to download a movie. If you don't rate limit them at all, that movie's downloaded in a couple of minutes and they're off the network. So it sounds good in theory, and I understand there's some, if you're paying for the Wi-Fi or you're having them pay for tiers, that's a different story, and that's a whole different podcast. But generally speaking, unless you absolutely have a compelling reason to do it, don't. Moving on, this one I look at this one and I'm scratching my head because it just doesn't sound pleasant. RRM malfunctions.
Yes.
What say you, Mr. Palmer?
This is another one of those. I tell people all the time, I'm not smart. I don't know stuff because I'm smart. I know things because I've screwed it up. So I've been through these pains. It's like, I know the mistakes people are going to make because guess what? I've already made them, and usually more than once. So RRM malfunctions are generally around the idea that, hey, you're going to turn on RRM, a radio resource manager of some sort, and every vendor has them, right? You're going to turn that on, and it's going to set all your channels and everything for you. It's an RF engineer in a box. And that really works really well as long as your client devices can see each other over the air, from the RF perspective, because then it knows, hey, who are my RF neighbors, what channel they're on, all that kind of stuff. Now, if that fails, what ends up happening is the APs don't think that there's anybody around them. So that's what they report back to the controller and says, hey, I'm on an island all by myself. And so the controller goes, great. When you're on an island all by yourself, you get channel 36 at 80 megahertz wide. And then you come in on a Monday morning and you look and you go, why are all my APs on channel 36 at 80 megahertz wide when I have 10 of them that can see each other?
Now, my only example that I can share in the wild, and I'm not going to name and shame, but I had one site that it was sort of, instead of having it misconfigured, it wasn't on at all. So you literally had a building with like 100 APs, and they kept on, and nobody had been on site, and people were complaining that, it's just horrible Wi-Fi. And we finally went on site, and I think we turned on the survey tool, and within like 2 APs, we're looking at the readout, and we're going, well, that's a problem, because it was every AP was on the same channel. They didn't turn on, they didn't do any channel plan. It was everything just went auto, and then left it, turned it off. There was no intelligence whatsoever. And yeah, when you've got 100 APs all on the same channel on 2.4 and 5, bad day, scary bad day.
And this is we could even do a whole podcast episode on this. There are a lot of cool features in a lot of different platforms and everything else that really can help out a Wi-Fi engineer. But for most of those, you can't just turn them on and walk away. You have to do some RRM as a prime example. Channelfly is another example, where you have all these cool features, and a lot of people think, hey, I can just turn those on and walk away. I don't have to adjust any of the defaults. That's not true. If you're going to use these tools like RRM, make sure you take some time to understand what they do, how they operate, how they're supposed to operate, and then just keep an eye on it to make sure that they're not screwing you, because they will. If you don't take the time to learn your platform, learn those tools, learn how they operate, more importantly, learn how they break, then it will 100% make your life a lot more difficult and then make us scream.
Yeah, and Channelfly is a good one. And I missed the scream cue there. Channelfly is a good one because I think Jim and I have been on a number of conferences and events and Slack channels and things like that, where invariably there's always somebody who's never worked for Ruckus who has a Channelfly joke to make. So it's a bit of a sensitive subject with us, but the reality is most of the times when people see a Ruckus AP in the wild and they're like, that doesn't work well, it's because something like that where somebody didn't know what they were doing with Channelfly. And again, and it's a I can make a generic statement that applies for almost every vendor. It's got great tech, but if you don't know what you're doing with it, you will screw it up.
Yes.
Which can be very scary.
All right, next one on here.
This is a good one. I like this one. And I've seen this one in the wild before, and it just makes you cringe. Putting an internal AP, just an omnidirectional AP in a metal box.
Yes. And I'll do you one better.
Mounting it.
I'll do you one better. In a metal box above drop ceiling, with the door slightly opened.
Yeah, I've had customers do that. I mean, years back when I didn't know what I was doing with Wi-Fi because I wasn't doing Wi-Fi, I had a manufacturing facility that put their APs in metal like mesh boxes because if the mesh would let it through, it doesn't. Because they were worried that, and I'm like, well, is this like forklifts hitting them? They're like, no, we're worried about people stealing them.
Yep.
Well, if you just don't put them up, it's not going to work. I don't think we need to say much more about that.
No, metal boxes, really small mesh. Don't do it. There's a bunch of other solutions. Take some time. Just Google it. You're going to find a solution in like 3 minutes on Google.
Yes, and if the heathens can't be trusted to not steal the Wi-Fi, then just don't give it to them.
Yes.
All right, moving on. This is one I referenced before. APs mounted like a clock, as in like not mounted correctly. For the most part, most APs should be mounted in a particular way, usually called out in some sort of documentation that comes with the AP, or you can always ask your SE. They'll help you out. Generally speaking, most of them should not be mounted on the wall. We do have some, the H series, you can wall mount them, but
that's designed to be mounted on a wall.
I was in a gymnasium yesterday that had, I'm not even sure, I didn't get close enough to see what it was. It wasn't ours, but it was mounted like a clock right next to the exit sign. And I just put my head in my hands and wanted to weep. So yeah, don't do that.
Well, no, hold on there, John. I have to throw an "it depends" in here. What if? So I saw. I'm not saying this is the exception that proves the rule. I saw somebody who was very, very particular. I'm trying to come up with a good family friendly way to say that. Who didn't want to sell his one plot of land, and his plot of land was 6 feet wide. So he built a house that was 6 feet wide, and it was really long and it was really tall. Now, if you're that guy who has a house that is 6 feet wide, go ahead and mount your AP like a clock on the wall, because you'll get nice coverage up and down, through the floor. But because your house is only 6 feet wide, you're going to get plenty of coverage off the front of that AP, that will go from left to right, because you'll get some coverage. But, if you're not that guy living in a house that's 6 feet wide and 4 stories tall, yeah. So if you understand the radiation patterns, if you understand those patterns that are in all the data sheets, every AP, every antenna data sheet has a pattern. Understand your pattern. And then if you understand that and you're like, hey, I only need to cover 6 feet, off the face of my AP, but I want to go up and down. Sure, mount it like a clock. I'm fine with that. But don't mount it like a clock because you're lazy.
Agreed. Now, to our next fun one. Let's see what we got. We got low minimum basic rate and DSS rates. That's scary.
That is scary. Now, again, I mean, let's be honest with you, right? Or with the exception of the mounting your AP inside a metal box or a mesh cage, without external antennas that run outside of the box. For the most part of these, there's a lot of, it depends. It's like, all these things. It's like, hey, if you know what you're doing, if you know the rules, you know how to break the rules. And so for this one, low minimum basic rates, or leaving DSSS still enabled. For the most part, these are really bad ideas unless you really understand why you have those and what you're doing with them. But for the most part, I saw a PCAP recently. And the great part is it was a PCAP from somebody else in a different state, and they just sent it to me, and they said, hey, check this out. And so it was a bunch of beacons. It was a whole bunch of other stuff. So I took it and I just dumped it straight into Wi-Fi Explorer Pro. Thanks, Adrian. And it was funny because it broke the whole thing down for me. And I was able to take a look at all the beacons, and I could look, and I'm like, and my first response to her was, you're in a high dense environment. And yet some of these SSIDs are running a minimum basic rate of 6 megabits per second. I was like, that is never going to work. And it turns out I was right.
It happens from time to time.
It does, but it's not very often. So when it does, I need to celebrate it. But yay!
But in all seriousness, I mean, you're right. I mean, there are some of these, and there's somebody that's going to list maybe. And the reality is there was a reason why they did it like that, even though it breaks all of the conventional wisdom. But if you know the rules and you know what your expectations are, you can bend them or break them a little bit. I mean, I guarantee there's probably every Wi-Fi person that listens to this podcast and every Wi-Fi person who doesn't has probably installed something the exact opposite way that they knew they should have because of one reason or another. Temporary install. It was the only way to get any coverage at all, and it was like they sold their soul to get it done. Whatever. But generally speaking, these are, that's why these are scary.
Yep. And I think a lot of this stuff, and I think we can wrap this up with sort of one final thought. And we've referenced it a couple of times. It's about knowing and understanding the rules. Once you know and understand the rules, that then allows you to be able to break the rules, but only when required and only when you know why you're breaking the rules. And that's the last scary thing. I think that we can really encompass a lot of these things into people that are doing things without knowing why they're doing it. It's like, oh, Jim said to put antennas 8 feet off the ground on a ceiling and pointed straight down, external antennas. When you would normally put in an omnidirectional AP, just the built-in antennas. And so people go, oh, I saw so-and-so do this, pick a name out of the usual suspects from, whoever, from whatever vendor. And they go, that person did that. So now I can go do that. But if you don't understand why that person did that, you can't just blindly follow that lead.
Yeah. Agreed. Looking at your list, because I know we're going to close this one out, but the last three are perfectly tied together. Don't put your APs too close. Don't put your APs in a straight line. And to your point, you do something because you're copying it, but you don't know why, and it doesn't work. You walk into a building and you see it. If it's designed a certain way and it's working, somebody took the time to make that design to work that way. Now, you mentioned the APs with external antennas pointing straight down. I made a design like that before in a past life, and I did it in a very particular way. And people that didn't know why and didn't know the parameters were going, that's a horrible design. But it was a wide open floor plan.
Mm-hmm.
Literally wide open shared desk seating, lots of devices in a very finite space. I needed the AP coverage, or rather the capacity, and the only way to do that was with literal directional antennas pointing straight down because I had it was just but it depends. I knew what I was doing, and I knew what I had to do to make that work, and I validated it. But I can't you can't just, there's no photocopy button. You can't just mimic it, because I could go in to look at what you did at a former job or vice versa. And unless I'm there to tell you, or you're there to tell me, I'm probably going to screw it up.
And, a lot of that comes down to being able to look at, and that's where this is where people mess it up almost 100% of the time. Unless you can look at the hardware, and external antennas are a prime example of this, and know exactly what the specifications of that antenna is. If you can't do that, then you can't just copy and paste it. But if you do know that, if you can look at that antenna, you go, I know the beam widths, I know the gains, I know the patterns, I know everything about that antenna just by looking at it. Then you can understand why somebody did that. But the problem we have with too many people is they look at it and they go, oh, it's just an external antenna. It's probably an Omni. And so they're like, oh, but if it's not, but if you can't do that, then don't ask questions, jump on all the social medias, jump on everything else and say, hey, somebody help educate me to understand, why would somebody do something like this? That once you understand the whys, and I think Keith Parsons says this all the time too, is like once you know and understand the rules, you then have license to break the rules. But until then, if you're just running around doing things and going, well, so-and-so did it, without understanding the whys, then you are going to build some of the scariest Wi-Fi ever. And we will all be laughing at you behind your backs, because thankfully we've gotten better at not laughing at you in public.
Yeah. But I think and I don't want to come off as a bashing episode. And I know
no, it's not,
we say it in jest, but it really does depend. Because at the end of the day, like I said, if you don't know why somebody designed it some way, then you don't know why it exists that way. and it may have been perfectly well designed and validated and work. But it defies all logic. Now, again, like Jim said, the one that we mentioned that absolutely won't is if you stick an AP in a metal box with no external antennas at all, you're really going to have some bad coverage. But anyways, on that note,
this was fun. I like this.
I was going to say, I think that's enough screams for the day. Hopefully everybody's having fun. We'll drop this one on Halloween. It'll be a nice trick or treat episode for you. You can listen to it while you're out there. We'll the kiddies will be out there getting you candy, and you'll be
learning about Wi-Fi.
Yeah, why not? It's fun. It's Wi-Fi's supposed to be fun, right?
Yes.
So on that note, we'll hit the outro, and we'll see everybody on the next episode.
See you guys.
If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us using the address ruckcast@comscope.com. To learn more about Ruckus products and services that we may have talked about on this or any other podcast, please check the links in the About section of the show.